Welcome, friends, and settle in, because tonight we are setting out on the longest walk we have ever taken together. A slow and tender journey past the resting places of 30 of the most impossibly handsome men who ever stood before a camera. These were the faces that built the movies, the leading men of old Hollywood and the golden age that followed, the men whose looks were so extraordinary that studios were built on the tilt of a jaw and the shadow of a cheekbone. The men who made audiences gasp in darkened theaters and mailed love letters by the truckload. And here is the quiet truth that binds every one of them together. Beauty like that does not last, not in the flesh, and each of these men, no matter how brightly he burned, came at last to a crypt or a plot of earth or a scattering of ash upon the sea, and that is where we will find them tonight. We will travel from a crowded old cemetery beside a movie studio in Hollywood to the rolling hills of Glendale. From the deserts near Palm Springs to a churchyard in Indiana, from a hidden Quaker grave in Brooklyn to a monastery in the French countryside, from a white tomb in Cairo to the wild waters of the Pacific. Some of these men lie beneath stones you could stand before and touch. Many of them chose the sea or the wind instead. Every one of them was, in his moment, considered the most beautiful man alive, and every one of them proves the same gentle lesson that even the most dazzling face is only borrowed for a little while, and that what truly lasts is the light on the screen and the memory carried in the hearts of strangers. We will celebrate them honestly and with affection, without lingering in the sorrow, and we will let each of them go the way he deserves, gently, gratefully, with a smile. So, take my arm, keep your voice low, the way you would in any resting place, and let us begin where the whole idea of the beautiful movie star truly began. In the heart of Los Angeles, pressed against the wall of a working film studio, lies Hollywood Forever Cemetery, a place of weathered marble and reflecting pools and towering palms, and here, in a modest interior crypt, rests the man who invented the very idea of the swooning matinee idol. Rudolph Valentino was born in a small town in southern Italy in the spring of 1895, and he came to America with almost nothing, working as a gardener, a dishwasher, a dancer for hire in the ballrooms of New York, drifting westward toward the young and hungry movie business. And then the camera found him, and the world lost its mind. With his dark, smoldering eyes and his graceful, feline movement, Valentino became the first true sex symbol of the screen. The original Latin lover, starring in silent spectacles like The Sheik and The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, films that made women faint in the aisles and made men deeply, resentfully nervous. He was more than a star. He was a phenomenon, a new kind of fame the world had never quite seen. But the flame that burns that bright rarely burns for long. In the summer of 1926, at the absolute height of his fame, Valentino collapsed in New York and was rushed into surgery, and the infection that followed took his life within days. He was only 31 years old. What happened next has never been repeated. An estimated 100,000 people flooded the streets of New York to view his body. Riots broke out, and the young movie industry understood for the first time the terrifying power of the thing it had created. He was laid to rest here in a borrowed crypt, and for decades, a mysterious, veiled woman in black appeared each year on the anniversary of his death, leaving a single red rose. Stand here, in the cool of the mausoleum, and you are standing at the very beginning of it all, the first beautiful man the movies ever loved to death. From that first great heartthrob, let us travel to the grandest cemetery in all of Los Angeles, the sprawling green hills of Forest Lawn in Glendale, where so much of Hollywood's golden age has come to rest, because here lies a man whose very name became a byword for dashing, reckless, devastating male beauty. Errol Flynn was born in Tasmania, off the coast of Australia, in the summer of 1909, and his life before Hollywood already read like an adventure film. A young man who had been a gold prospector, a sailor, and a wanderer with a taste for danger that never left him. When he arrived in Hollywood in the mid-30s, he was almost supernaturally good-looking, tall and lean and athletic, with a flashing grin and a devil in his eye, and the studio made him a swashbuckling superstar overnight in Captain Blood. Then came The Adventures of Robin Hood, in glorious Technicolor, and Flynn, in green tights with a sword in his hand, became the single most dashing image the movies had yet produced, a man who seemed born to leap from balconies and duel villains and sweep women off their feet, grinning the entire time. For a decade he was the definition of masculine glamour, and off-screen he lived exactly as recklessly as he looked. A legendary carouser whose appetites were so notorious that a phrase entered the language, "in like Flynn," to describe a man who got away with anything. But that reckless living caught up with him cruelly and fast. Years of hard drinking wore his beautiful face and body down until, by his late 40s, he looked far older than his years. In the autumn of 1959, Errol Flynn suffered a heart attack and died in Vancouver. He was only 50 years old, and the doctor who examined him reportedly said his body was that of a much older man, a body that had lived at triple speed. He was laid to rest here in these Glendale hills, the eternal swashbuckler finally at peace. And if there is any consolation, it is that the film survives, that somewhere right now Robin Hood is still leaping through Sherwood Forest, still grinning, still young, still devastatingly handsome. Forever. Let us return now to Hollywood forever, back to that crowded old cemetery beside the studio wall, because Valentino does not rest there alone, and here, beneath an elegant monument by a reflecting pool, lies the man who came before even him, the very first swashbuckler, and the founding king of Hollywood itself. Douglas Fairbanks was born in Denver, Colorado, in the spring of 1883, and he brought to the silent screen a boundless, athletic joy unlike anything audiences had seen. A grinning, acrobatic hero who did all his own leaping and vaulting and sword fighting with the glee of an overgrown boy. He became the screen's first great action star in dazzling adventures like The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and The Thief of Baghdad. And he was so central to the young industry that he helped found the United Artists Studio and co-founded the academy that gives out the Oscars, even hosting the very first Academy Awards ceremony. Together with his wife, the beloved star Mary Pickford, he reigned over Hollywood as half of its first royal couple. Their mansion, Pickfair, the most famous home in America, the place where the young movie colony came to be knighted by its king and queen. He was handsome in a warm, vigorous, sun-bronzed way, the picture of health and optimism and daring-do, and for a decade, he was the most popular male star in the world. But the coming of sound and the passing years dimmed his run, and his great marriage ended, and something of the boyish spark went out of him. In the winter of 1939, Douglas Fairbanks died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was 56 years old, and his reported last words, that he had never felt better, have the bittersweet ring of the eternal optimist he always was. He rests here at Hollywood forever, beneath a long reflecting pool and a marble monument, the founding father of the swashbuckler and of Hollywood royalty itself, still grinning somewhere in the flickering dark. And these same grounds hold another beautiful man, one whose face was so perfect the studios feared no one would take him seriously. Tyrone Power was born in Cincinnati in the spring of 1914 into a family of actors that stretched back generations, and he inherited a face of almost startling perfection, dark-haired and fine-featured, with an elegance the camera adored. He became one of the great matinee idols of the late 30s and 40s, a swashbuckler and romantic lead in glossy hits like The Mark of Zorro and Blood and Sand. A man so handsome that the studio worried audiences would never see the actor beneath, which frustrated Power endlessly, for he longed to be more than a pretty face. And he proved he was, most memorably in the dark and brilliant Nightmare Alley, playing a doomed carnival con man, revealing a depth critics had never expected. He was also a man of real courage, for when the Second World War came, Power did not hide behind his stardom. He enlisted in the Marine Corps and served as a pilot, flying into brutal Pacific battles, carrying cargo and wounded men under fire, a genuine war hero beneath the beautiful face. He returned to Hollywood more serious and more weathered, still handsome but carrying something heavier behind the eyes. In the autumn of 1958, Tyrone Power was in Spain filming an epic called Solomon and Sheba, shooting a strenuous dueling scene, when he suffered a massive heart attack right there on the set and died within hours. He was only 44 years old, gone in an instant, in costume, sword in hand, at his labor. He was brought home and laid to rest here at Hollywood forever. And there is a terrible poignancy in it. A beautiful, athletic man who survived the war in the Pacific only to fall dueling for a movie. Stand at his grave near the reflecting pool and remember a man who was so much more than the lovely face the studios tried to sell. From Hollywood forever, let us travel a short distance across the city to Calvary Cemetery, a vast and dignified Catholic burial ground in East Los Angeles, where beneath a modest marker rests one of the great romantic idols of the silent age, a man who inherited Valentino's crown. Ramon Novarro was born Ramon Samaniego in Durango, Mexico, in the winter of 1899, and he fled the chaos of revolution as a young man to seek his fortune in California, waiting tables and dancing until the movies discovered his dark, sensitive, extraordinarily handsome face. He rose to fame in the swashbuckler Scaramouche and then reached the summit of silent stardom in the title role of the original Ben-Hur, one of the most spectacular films of its era, his athletic grace and beauty making him an international sensation. When Valentino died in 1926, it was Novarro who inherited the mantle of the screen's great Latin lover, one of the top box office draws in the world, adored by millions. But like so many silent stars, his career faded with the coming of sound and the passing of the years, and he lived much of his later life quietly and privately, a gentle and religious man far from the spotlight that had once blazed on him. His story reached a tragic and violent end in the autumn of 1968, when his life was taken by intruders in his own Hollywood home. He was 69 years old, and the cruelty of that ending shocked a city that had once worshipped him. We will not dwell on the darkness of that night, for it is not how he should be remembered. He rests here, at Calvary Cemetery, and what endures is not the manner of his leaving but the beauty of his prime. The dark-eyed prince of the silent screen racing his chariot across the sand, forever young in the silver light. Let us return once more to the green hills of Forest Lawn in Glendale, for they hold several of our most beautiful men, and the next was known in his day simply as the Great Lover. John Gilbert was born in Utah in the summer of 1897, into a hard and unhappy childhood of neglect, and he escaped to Hollywood as a teenager and clawed his way up from bit parts to the very top of the silent firmament. With his dark, dashing looks and his passionate, expressive style, Gilbert became the great romantic idol of the 1920s, rivaling even Valentino as a box office draw, unforgettable in The Big Parade and The Merry Widow. But he is remembered most for his smoldering on-screen love scenes with the divine Greta Garbo in films like Flesh and the Devil, scenes so charged with real feeling because the two were passionately in love off-screen as well, a romance that became the stuff of Hollywood legend. And then, almost overnight, it all collapsed. When the movies learned to talk, John Gilbert's career was destroyed with shocking speed, and for decades the cruel story was told that his voice was too high and thin for sound, though the truth was more likely studio politics and personal grudges working against him. Whatever the cause, the greatest lover of the silent screen found himself suddenly unwanted, and the fall broke him, driving him to drink as his fame drained away. In the winter of 1936, John Gilbert died of a heart attack. He was only 38 years old, a beautiful man undone by the very technology that should have carried him higher. He rests here at Forest Lawn, and what remains is the passion of his prime, the great lover holding Garbo in the flickering dark, one of the most romantic images the movies ever made. And these hills hold another matinee idol, a man so flawlessly good-looking that the studio marketed him quite literally as perfect. Robert Taylor was born Spangler Arlington Brugg in the tiny farming town of Philly, Nebraska, in the summer of 1911, a doctor's son and a cellist who came to acting through a college theater group and was signed by a studio that could hardly believe what the camera saw. For Robert Taylor possessed what was called the most perfect profile in Hollywood, dark and sculpted and impossibly symmetrical, and he was sold to the world as the man with the perfect profile. He became one of the biggest romantic stars of the 30s and 40s, tender opposite Greta Garbo in the heartbreaking Camille and Vivian Leigh in the beloved Waterloo Bridge, and later a rugged star of epics like Quo Vadis and Ivanhoe. For a time, he was half of one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples, married to the formidable Barbara Stanwyck, and when the Second World War came, he served as a Navy flight instructor, trading glamour for duty. But there was a shadow he could never outrun, for Taylor was a lifelong, relentless chain smoker, rarely seen without a cigarette, and in the end that habit collected its terrible debt. In the summer of 1969, after a long and painful battle, Robert Taylor died of lung cancer. He was only 57 years old. His old friend, Ronald Reagan, then the governor of California, delivered a moving eulogy, and he was laid to rest here at Forest Lawn in the Garden of Honor, the man with the perfect profile now resting behind a quiet garden wall. his beauty preserved forever in silver light even as the man himself returned to the earth. And these same Glendale Hills hold one more, and this one wore a title no one ever disputed, for he was quite simply called the King. Clark Gable was born in Ohio in the winter of 1901, the son of an oil driller, and he came up the hard way, working in oil fields and tent shows and struggling for years before Hollywood understood what it had: a big, broad-shouldered, powerfully masculine man with a roguish grin and an easy confidence that made him irresistible. Unlike the delicate beauty of a Valentino or the sculpted perfection of a Taylor, Gable's appeal was rugged and virile and knowing, and it made him the biggest star in the world for the better part of 2 decades, so dominant that the industry crowned him the King of Hollywood. He won an Academy Award for the comedy It Happened One Night, and legend holds that when he removed his shirt to reveal no undershirt beneath, sales of undershirts across America collapsed. And then came the role that made him immortal, Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, a performance so perfectly matched to the man that no one else can be imagined in the part. But his private life carried a deep and lasting grief. For the great love of his life, his wife, the actress Carole Lombard, was killed in a plane crash during the war while returning from selling war bonds, and friends said he never fully recovered, that a light had gone out of him. In the autumn of 1960, not long after finishing a physically punishing film called The Misfits, Clark Gable suffered a heart attack and died. He was 59 years old. He was laid to rest here in the Great Mausoleum, beside his beloved Carole Lombard, reunited at last with the woman whose loss he had carried for nearly 20 years, the King of Hollywood at rest beside his queen. Let us leave the mausoleums of Glendale now and travel across the city to a small and star-studded pocket of green tucked among the high-rises of Westwood, called Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park, where some of the most famous names in Hollywood rest shoulder to shoulder in a patch of land no bigger than a city block. And here we find a man of ferocious talent and one of the most famous chins in the movies. Kirk Douglas was born Isser Danielovich in New York in the winter of 1916, the son of poor immigrant peddlers. And he fought his way out of that poverty with an intensity that never left him, becoming one of the most electric and explosive leading men of his generation. Handsome in a hard, chiseled, granite-jawed way, with that unmistakable dimpled chin, he tore across the screen as a ruthless boxer in Champion, a tormented painter in Lust for Life, a doomed officer in Paths of Glory, and above all as the rebel slave in the epic Spartacus, a film he championed and produced, using his power to break the cruel Hollywood blacklist by crediting a banished writer openly at last. He was a force of nature, a man of towering will who kept working and fighting through a helicopter crash and a stroke, and he lived to the astonishing age of 103. When he died in the winter of 2020, he left behind not only a body of unforgettable work, but a son, Michael, who became a great star in his own right. He rests here in Westwood, in this crowded little garden of legends, the intense and indomitable Spartacus finally at peace, having outlived nearly everyone he ever worked with, his fierce, beautiful face preserved forever on the screen. And Westwood holds another of our beautiful men, this one an athlete-turned-actor whose smile could light a theater. Burt Lancaster was born in New York in the autumn of 1913. And before he ever faced a camera, he was a circus acrobat. And that athletic grace and dazzling physical confidence became his signature, along with a gleaming, magnetic smile and a powerful, sun-bronzed presence. He exploded into stardom in film noir, and then showed a range few expected, unforgettable Rolling in the Surf with Deborah Kerr in From Here to Eternity, one of the most famous romantic images in film history, swinging through the air in trapeze, and winning an Academy Award as the silver-tongued con-man preacher in Elmer Gantry. As he aged, he only deepened as an artist, giving one of his finest performances as a man swimming home across the pools of suburbia in the haunting film The Swimmer. He was, throughout, a man of conscience and courage, lending his fame to civil rights and countless good causes. In the autumn of 1994, after a stroke had quieted his final years, Burt Lancaster died at the age of 80. He was cremated, and his ashes were buried here at Westwood beneath a large oak tree, so that the acrobat who once flew through the air now rests in the shade of spreading branches, his brilliant smile shining on forever in the films he left behind. And here in Westwood rests one more, a man whose easy, effortless cool made everything look simple. Dean Martin was born in Ohio in the summer of 1917, the son of an Italian immigrant barber, and he rose from small-town card tables and smoky nightclubs to become one of the most beloved entertainers America ever produced. A crooner with a warm golden voice, and a leading man with a lazy, handsome charm that seemed to promise the whole world was in on the joke. He first conquered the country as one half of the wildly popular comedy team with Jerry Lewis, then proved himself a fine actor in his own right in westerns like Rio Bravo and capers like Ocean's 11, where he reigned as one of the coolest members of the legendary Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra, whom we will visit shortly. He made it all look so easy. The singing, the acting, the comedy, that people sometimes forgot how much craft lay beneath the effortless grace. But his later years were shadowed by the loss of his son in a plane crash, a grief from which he never truly recovered, and he withdrew more and more from the world. On Christmas Day of 1995, Dean Martin died at the age of 78. He rests here in Westwood beneath a marker carrying the title of his most famous song, a promise that everybody loves somebody sometime, the eternal picture of relaxed, handsome, golden-voiced cool. Not far from these graves, this same small cemetery received another of our men, one whose beauty carried a dignity that changed the world. Sidney Poitier was born in Miami in the winter of 1927 and raised in the Bahamas, the son of poor tomato farmers, and he arrived in New York as a teenager with almost nothing, teaching himself to read the newspaper aloud to shed his accent and chase an impossible dream. He became not only one of the most handsome and commanding leading men of his era, but a figure of genuine historical importance, the first black man ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor for his warm performance in Lilies of the Field. With his tall, elegant bearing and his quiet moral authority, he broke barriers that had stood since the movies began, starring in landmark films like In the Heat of the Night, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and To Sir with Love, carrying the weight of representation with a grace that never faltered. He was later knighted and served as a diplomat, honored around the world not only as an artist, but as a man of towering decency. When Sidney Poitier died in the winter of 2022 at the age of 94, the whole world mourned a pioneer. He was cremated, his ashes kept close by the family who loved him, so there is no grand monument to visit, only the enduring image of a beautiful, dignified man who opened doors that can never again be closed, and who proved that grace and greatness know no color. From Westwood, let us travel to the seaside bluffs of Pacific Palisades, where a quiet Episcopal church holds the ashes of a man whose statuesque beauty made him the go-to hero of the biblical epic. Charlton Heston was born in Illinois in the autumn of 1923, a tall, broad, chisel-featured young man with a commanding voice and a physique made for the widescreen spectacles that defined his career. He became the definitive epic hero of his age, parting the Red Sea as Moses in Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, racing his chariot to victory and winning the Academy Award as the title character in the colossal Ben-Hur, defending Spain as El Cid, and battling the future in the science fiction landmark Planet of the Apes. Few actors have ever seemed so perfectly carved for the grand and the mythic, his granite profile and towering frame filling the enormous screens of the epics as though he had stepped down from a Roman frieze. Off-screen, he was a man of conviction who marched for civil rights in the early 1960s, standing alongside those who fought for justice, and who later in life became an outspoken public figure on very different matters. A reminder that our heroes are complicated men. In his final years, he faced the cruel fog of Alzheimer's disease with dignity, announcing his own diagnosis to a public that had loved him for half a century. In the spring of 2008, Charlton Heston died at the age of 84. His ashes rest here in the columbarium of a quiet seaside church, the great parter of seas and racer of chariots finally still, his mighty image preserved forever in the epics that once filled the largest screens in the world. From these bluffs, let us travel into the heart of downtown Los Angeles, to a soaring modern cathedral of concrete and light, in whose quiet crypts rests a man whose handsomeness came wrapped in something rarer, a deep and unmistakable decency. Gregory Peck was born in San Diego in the spring of 1916, a tall man with dark hair, a grave and beautiful face, and a voice like a cello. But what set Peck apart from so many handsome leading men was that his looks seemed to carry a moral weight, an inner goodness audiences trusted instinctively. He became one of the most respected stars in Hollywood, earning acclaim in Roman Holiday and Gentleman's Agreement. But the role that defined him, and defines him still, was Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, the quiet, principled lawyer standing alone against injustice. A performance that won him the Academy Award and has been named the single greatest movie hero of all time. It was a role that seemed to fit him not just as an actor but as a man. For off-screen, Peck was known for exactly the dignity and conscience he projected on film, a lifelong champion of good causes, and a beloved elder statesman of his profession. And unlike so many of the tragic beauties in this journey, he was granted the rarest gift of all: a long, full, honorable life. He worked into his later years, adored and respected to the very end, and in the summer of 2003, he died peacefully in his sleep at his Los Angeles home. He was 87 years old, surrounded by the family he loved, his reputation utterly untarnished. He rests here in the crypts beneath this great cathedral, a fitting and dignified home for a man whose handsomeness was, in the end, the least remarkable thing about him. Now let us leave the city and drive east into the desert, to the sun-baked Coachella Valley near Palm Springs, where a quiet cemetery called Desert Memorial Park holds a simple flat marker for one of the most famous men who ever lived. Frank Sinatra was born in Hoboken, New Jersey, in the winter of 1915, the only child of Italian immigrants, and he rose from those working-class streets to become perhaps the defining entertainer of the 20th century, the greatest popular singer of them all, and along the way a formidable and handsome movie star with a pair of piercing blue eyes that earned him the nickname Ol' Blue Eyes. On the screen, he was far more than a crooner, winning the Academy Award for his moving dramatic turn in From Here to Eternity, chilling audiences in the political thriller The Manchurian Candidate, and leading his legendary Rat Pack through the glittering caper Ocean's 11. He lived life exactly on his own terms, with a swagger and a style and a temper that became the stuff of legend, adored and feared and imitated in equal measure, the undisputed chairman of his own dazzling world. When Frank Sinatra died in the spring of 1998 at the age of 82, the lights of Las Vegas were dimmed in his honor. He was laid to rest here in the desert beneath a modest flat stone, buried, they say, with a bottle of his favorite whiskey and a roll of dimes for the payphones he never wanted to be without. His epitaph, the title of one of his own songs, a quiet promise that the best is yet to come. From the desert of California, let us cross into Nevada now, to the bright lights of Las Vegas, and a cemetery in the suburb of Henderson, where a man buried with his favorite things rests after one of the most versatile careers of his era. Tony Curtis was born Bernard Schwartz in the Bronx in the summer of 1925, the son of poor Hungarian immigrants, and he was, in his youth, almost impossibly pretty, a dark-haired, blue-eyed heartthrob whose looks first made him a teen idol before his talent made him something far more lasting. For Curtis was determined to be taken seriously, and he was, earning an Academy Award nomination alongside Sidney Poitier in the tense drama The Defiant Ones, and giving a razor-sharp performance in the acid classic Sweet Smell of Success. But he is best loved for making people laugh, disguising himself in drag, and doing a hilarious impression of Cary Grant in Some Like It Hot, one of the greatest comedies ever made, and battling as a slave beside Kirk Douglas in Spartacus. He was married for a time to the actress Janet Leigh and was the father of the actress Jamie Lee Curtis, a Hollywood dynasty in his own right. He kept performing, painting, and living large for 6 decades. In the autumn of 2010, Tony Curtis died at the age of 85. He was laid to rest here near Las Vegas, buried with a few of his favorite possessions in the theatrical, life-loving style he had always lived. The pretty boy who became a real actor, forever young and grinning in his greatest films. Now our journey turns eastward across the whole breadth of the country, to the flat green farmland of Indiana, to a small and ordinary churchyard in the little town of Fairmount, where beneath a simple headstone often crowded with flowers and lipstick kisses, lies a young man who became immortal by dying young. James Dean was born in Indiana in the winter of 1931, and after his mother died when he was a boy, he was raised on a farm right here in Fairmount, a sensitive, restless, searching young man who found his way to Hollywood and seemed to arrive already legendary. And here is the astonishing thing about James Dean. He made only 3 films, just 3, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. And yet on the strength of those 3 performances and one beautiful, brooding, wounded face, he became one of the most enduring icons in the entire history of American culture, the very picture of restless, misunderstood youth, the patron saint of every teenager who ever felt like an outsider. He had a quality no acting class could teach, a raw, aching vulnerability that poured off the screen, so that audiences did not just admire him, they felt him. On the last day of September in 1955, James Dean was driving his silver Porsche to a racing event when another car turned in front of him at a rural California intersection, and he was killed almost instantly. He was only 24 years old. Rebel Without a Cause had not even been released. He died before the world had fully discovered him, which meant the world discovered him as a legend rather than a man, forever young, forever beautiful, forever caught at the height of his promise. His body was brought home here to Fairmount, and he was laid to rest among ordinary Indiana families, the most famous rebel of all sleeping quietly in the small town he came from. Let us continue east now, all the way to New York City, and to one of the most hidden resting places in this entire journey, for tucked away in the wooded heart of Brooklyn's Prospect Park, behind a locked gate, sits a tiny, secret Quaker graveyard where the stones are plain by the custom of that humble faith. And here, in a spot the caretakers will not even publicly identify, rests one of the most sensitive and beautiful actors who ever lived. Montgomery Clift was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in the autumn of 1920, and he came to acting through the theater, a serious and intense young man who brought to the screen a new kind of male performance, quiet, wounded, deeply interior, influencing generations who followed. And he was, by wide agreement, breathtakingly beautiful, with delicate, perfect features and enormous dark eyes, so lovely that audiences and co-stars alike were undone by him. He earned acclaim and Oscar nominations in A Place in the Sun, opposite his dear friend Elizabeth Taylor, and From Here to Eternity, unforgettable as a stubborn, gentle soldier. But Clift was a tormented man, wrestling privately with pain, and in the middle of his career came the tragedy that changed everything. One night, in 1956, driving home from a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, he crashed his car, and the accident shattered his beautiful face. Surgeons rebuilt it, but it was never the same, and neither was he, and a slow decline through pain and drink stretched out over the 10 years that followed. In the summer of 1966, Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack in his Manhattan townhouse. He was only 45 years old. Because his mother had embraced the Quaker faith, he was brought here to this hidden Brooklyn cemetery, and at his family's request, the exact location of his grave is kept secret to this day, so that this beautiful, haunted man, gawked at his whole life, finally rests where no one can find him, in the quiet of the woods. Staying in New York, let us travel just north of the city, to a Catholic cemetery in the town of Hawthorne, called Gate of Heaven, where beneath a family marker rests a dark-eyed young star who burned bright and briefly. Sal Mineo was born in New York in the winter of 1939, the son of Sicilian immigrants, a strikingly handsome boy with soulful eyes who became, while still a teenager, one of the most promising young actors in Hollywood. He earned an Academy Award nomination for his tender, aching performance as the lonely, worshipful Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, forming with James Dean, whom we visited in Indiana, one of the most poignant pairings the screen has known, and he earned a second nomination for the epic Exodus. For a few years, he was a genuine teen idol, his face on magazine covers across the country. But as he grew older, the roles grew harder to find, as they so often did for child stars, and he turned to the stage to keep his art alive. His life was cut short in a senseless act of violence in the winter of 1976, when he was killed during a robbery outside his Los Angeles home. He was only 37 years old. We will not linger on the cruelty of that night, for it is not the measure of him. He was brought home to New York and laid to rest here at Gate of Heaven, and what endures is the beauty of his youth, the sensitive, dark-eyed boy reaching out for friendship in the most famous film of his generation, Forever Young in the Silver Light. And a short journey east on Long Island brings us to the elegant seaside village of Southampton, where, in the quiet grounds of Sacred Heart Cemetery, far from the Hollywood he conquered, rests one of the most iconic American faces of them all. Gary Cooper was born Frank James Cooper in Helena, Montana, in the spring of 1901, a genuine child of the American West who grew up on a ranch and carried the lean, weathered, unhurried grace of the frontier with him all his life. He drifted into the movies almost by accident, but the camera saw at once what made him special. A tall, quiet, ruggedly handsome presence who could say more with a glance and a pause than other actors could with a page of dialogue. He became the very embodiment of the ideal American man, the strong silent type made flesh, reigning as a top box office star for over 2 decades, unforgettable as the shy war hero in Sergeant York, a role that won him an Academy Award, as the doomed ballplayer Lou Gehrig in The Pride of the Yankees, and above all as the lonely marshal standing alone against the outlaws in High Noon, a performance of quiet, aching courage that won him a second Oscar. Off-screen, he was beloved throughout the industry, gentle and modest and adored. In the spring of 1961, Gary Cooper died of cancer at the age of 60, only days after his dear friend Jimmy Stewart had tearfully accepted an honorary Oscar on his behalf. A public moment so emotional it told the world their beloved Coop was dying. He was first laid to rest in Los Angeles, but years later, after his family moved east, his remains were brought here to this peaceful Long Island churchyard. And so the great man of the American West sleeps at last within sound of the Atlantic surf, quiet and dignified in the end, exactly as he had always seemed on the screen. Now our journey carries us across the ocean, all the way to Egypt, to a bright white tomb in a historic cemetery in Cairo, where rests a man whose dark, dashing beauty made him one of the few truly global movie stars. Omar Sharif was born in Alexandria, Egypt, in the spring of 1932, and after becoming a star in the Egyptian cinema, he crossed over into the English-speaking world in the most spectacular way imaginable, riding out of a shimmering desert mirage in David Lean's masterpiece Lawrence of Arabia, an entrance so unforgettable that it made him an international sensation overnight and earned him an Academy Award nomination. With his soulful eyes, his elegant mustache, and his continental charm, he became one of the most romantic leading men of the 1960s. Immortal as the poet caught in the Russian Revolution in the sweeping epic Dr. Zhivago, and as the gambler who loved Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl, he was a citizen of the world, fluent in many languages, and a famously passionate gambler and bridge player who freely admitted that he had chased pleasure and squandered much of his fortune and his promise. But the charm never dimmed, and he was beloved to the end as one of cinema's great romantic figures. In the summer of 2015, Omar Sharif died in Cairo at the age of 83. He rests here, in his beloved homeland, beneath an elegant white tomb, the dashing rider from the desert mirage finally home, his romantic image galloping on forever across the widescreen sands. From Egypt, let us travel to the green countryside of central France, to the grounds of a small Russian Orthodox monastery near the valley of the Loire, where beneath a simple stone marked with a Celtic cross, rests the ashes of one of the most magnetic and exotic stars the screen ever produced. Yul Brynner was born in the far eastern Russian city of Vladivostok in the summer of 1920, and his early life was a whirl of adventure across Russia, China, and France, working as a trapeze artist and a nightclub guitarist before he found his way to the stage. And then he found the role of a lifetime, the proud, fierce, bald-headed King of Siam in the musical The King and I, a part he played on stage an astonishing 4,500 times and then on film, winning the Academy Award and becoming, with his shaved head, his flashing eyes, and his commanding presence, one of the most instantly recognizable and magnetic figures in all of entertainment. He brought that same exotic power to epics like The Ten Commandments, and to the Western The Magnificent Seven, where he led the gunfighters dressed all in black. In his final act, he gave the world one last gift. For dying of lung cancer, he recorded a haunting anti-smoking message to be aired after his death, using his own passing to try to save others. In the autumn of 1985, Yul Brynner died at the age of 65. His ashes were carried across the sea and buried quietly here in the grounds of this remote French monastery, the wandering king from Vladivostok, finding his final rest in a place of profound peace, his magnetic presence blazing on forever in the films he left behind. From France, let us journey north to the wild and beautiful land of Scotland, for our next man asked to be returned to the country of his birth, his ashes scattered across the hills and waters he loved. Sean Connery was born in Edinburgh in the summer of 1930, into genuine hardship, a milkman and a coffin polisher and a bodybuilder, before the movies discovered the tall, dark, devastatingly handsome young Scotsman with the unforgettable voice. And then he became something the world had never seen. The very first James Bond, striding onto the screen in Dr. No, and defining the role of the suave secret agent so completely that every actor who followed would be measured against him, a byword for masculine cool and charm across 7 films. But Connery was far more than Bond, and he proved it across a long and distinguished career, winning the Academy Award as a tough Chicago cop in The Untouchables, and growing into one of the most beloved elder statesmen of the screen, his rugged beauty only deepening with age into something craggy and commanding and irresistible. He remained fiercely proud of his Scottish roots his whole life long. In the autumn of 2020, Sean Connery died in his sleep at his home in the Bahamas at the age of 90. In keeping with his wishes, he was cremated, and his ashes were carried home and scattered across Scotland, in the hills and waters near where he was born, so that the milkman's son, who became the most famous secret agent in the world, rests at last in the wild country he never stopped loving. Now our journey changes, for the men we have visited mostly lie beneath stones you could stand before, but many of the most beautiful faces of the movies left no single grave at all, choosing instead to be given to the wild places they loved, and the first of these was perhaps the most extraordinary talent of them all. Marlon Brando was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in the spring of 1924, and he arrived in New York as a young man and detonated like a bomb beneath the entire art of screen acting. With his shattering performance as the brutal, magnetic Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, Brando introduced a raw, mumbling, dangerous naturalism that made everything before it look false, becoming the most influential actor of the 20th century, the man every serious actor who followed would try to imitate. And he was, in his youth, staggeringly beautiful. A smoldering, sensual presence in a torn t-shirt, brooding on his motorcycle in The Wild One, and breaking hearts in On the Waterfront, where his tender, wounded performance won him an Academy Award and gave the world its most famous lament, that he could have been a contender. In his later years, he transformed again, heavier and more mysterious, delivering 2 of the greatest performances in film history, as the aging Don in The Godfather, an Oscar he famously refused in protest, and as the mad colonel in the jungle darkness of Apocalypse Now. But his private life was shadowed by deep unhappiness and terrible family tragedy, and he retreated more and more from the world, above all to a tiny coral atoll in Tahiti that he had fallen in love with and bought. In the summer of 2004, Marlon Brando died in Los Angeles at the age of 80, the greatest and most beautiful actor of his generation. He was cremated, and in keeping with the 2 poles of his restless soul, his ashes were divided and scattered in 2 wild places he had loved. Some on his beloved atoll in Tahiti, and some in the vast silence of Death Valley, so that there is no grave to visit, only the desert and the sea holding the pieces of an untamable spirit. And speaking of the sea, let us turn now to the wide gray Pacific, for several of our most beautiful men asked to be given to these waters, and the first was a sleepy-eyed king of film noir. Robert Mitchum was born in Connecticut in the summer of 1917, and after a wild, drifting youth of riding freight trains and doing hard labor, he wandered into the movies almost by accident and became one of the coolest and most effortlessly magnetic stars of his age. With his heavy-lidded eyes, his broad shoulders, and his air of unshakable, world-weary calm, Mitchum was the definitive anti-hero of film noir, unforgettable as the doomed private eye in the classic Out of the Past, terrifying as the murderous preacher in the nightmarish Night of the Hunter, and menacing as the stalking villain in the original Cape Fear. He cultivated a reputation as a rebel who did not much care for Hollywood's rules, and audiences adored him precisely because he seemed too cool to be trying at all, though beneath the sleepy indifference lay a genuinely gifted and surprisingly sensitive actor. He worked steadily for more than half a century, a familiar and beloved presence to generation after generation. In the summer of 1997, Robert Mitchum died at the age of 79. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered upon the Pacific Ocean, the coolest man in the room given at last to the restless water, his heavy-lidded gaze fixed forever on the screen. And this same Pacific received a golden boy who became a great and weathered actor. William Holden was born William Beadle in Illinois in the spring of 1918 and raised in Southern California, a bright young man studying chemistry who stumbled almost by accident into the movies and became, quite literally overnight, a star, plucked from obscurity for the lead in a film called Golden Boy, the nickname clinging to him ever after. And a golden boy he was, blonde and clean-cut and all-American handsome, But Holden was restless with mere prettiness, and he grew into one of the finest actors of his generation, unforgettable as the cynical, doomed screenwriter, narrating his own story in the immortal Sunset Boulevard, winning an Academy Award as the hard-bitten prisoner of war in Stalag 17, and moving audiences in The Bridge, On the River Kwai, and Network. As he aged, his beauty weathered magnificently into a lined, sardonic ruggedness, and off-screen he was a passionate conservationist who fell in love with Africa and devoted himself to protecting its wildlife. But he also carried a lifelong struggle with drinking. And in the end it took him in the loneliest of ways. For in the autumn of 1981, alone in his apartment, William Holden suffered a fall, and with no one there to help him, he died. He was 63 years old. In accordance with his own clearly stated wishes, there was no funeral and no service, and he was cremated and his ashes scattered here upon the Pacific. The golden boy returned quietly to the water, asking for no monument, only the sea. And this same restless Pacific received another, a very different sort, a man they called the King of Cool. Steve McQueen was born in Indiana in the spring of 1930, into a hard and loveless childhood of abandonment and reform school that would have broken most men, and he carried the wariness of that upbringing in his cool blue eyes for the rest of his life. He served in the Marines, drifted, and found acting almost as a way out, and once the camera found him, it never let go. For McQueen possessed a quality that could not be taught, an effortless, watchful, magnetic cool that made him one of the biggest stars in the world. He was rugged and handsome in a way that felt utterly modern and real, a man of few words and enormous presence, and he defined an entire kind of screen masculinity in classics like The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, with its legendary motorcycle leap, and Bullet, with its immortal car chase through the streets of San Francisco. He loved speed as much as anything, racing cars and motorcycles with genuine skill, forever chasing the edge. But a hidden danger had lodged itself in his body, a rare and merciless cancer linked to asbestos. And in the autumn of 1980, after seeking every treatment he could find, Steve McQueen died following surgery. He was only 50 years old, gone far too soon, the coolest man in the world, undone by an invisible enemy. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over the Pacific, given to the same water that had received Mitchum and Holden, three very different kinds of beautiful men now sharing the same endless resting place off the California coast. And there is one more given to this same Pacific, and his final chapter changed the world. Rock Hudson was born Roy Scherer in Illinois in the autumn of 1925, a tall, strapping, extraordinarily handsome young man who came to Hollywood with almost no experience and was built into a star from the ground up by the studio system, given a new name, new teeth, and a carefully constructed image of clean-cut, all-American masculinity. And it worked beyond anyone's dreams, for Rock Hudson became one of the biggest box office draws in the world, a serious, dramatic actor in films like Giant, where he starred alongside the young James Dean, whom we visited in Indiana, and a beloved romantic comedy star opposite Doris Day in a string of sparkling hits that made him the very picture of the ideal handsome husband. But behind that carefully built image, he carried a secret the era would never have allowed him to reveal, for he was a gay man at a time when such a truth could destroy a career overnight, and so he lived a double life, hidden and guarded, for his entire stardom. And then, in the mid-80s, Rock Hudson became the face of something far larger than himself, for when he grew ill and finally announced that he was dying of AIDS, he became the first major public figure to put a beloved, famous face to a disease the world had been ignoring and shaming. And his announcement, and his death soon after, in the autumn of 1985, at the age of 59, changed the national conversation almost overnight, moving a frightened public toward compassion in a way that years of pleading had not. His final and most private truth became his greatest gift to the world. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea, so there is no grave to visit, only the endless water and the memory of a beautiful man whose death helped save countless lives. From the ocean, let us turn back toward Hollywood one last time, though our next man too was scattered and left no stone. And so we honor him in the memory of a face so elegant it seemed to belong to another, finer world. Cary Grant was born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, in the winter of 1904, into genuine hardship and a broken, sorrowful childhood, and he ran away as a boy to join a troupe of acrobats, tumbling his way across England and eventually to America, a working-class kid from the English seaside who would remake himself into the most impossibly suave and polished man the movies ever produced. For Cary Grant was not merely handsome, he was the very definition of elegance, tall and tanned and perfectly poised, with a charm and a wit and a lightness of touch that no one before or since has ever quite matched. A man who seemed to glide through the world in a perfectly cut suit, equally brilliant in screwball comedy and Hitchcock suspense, in classics like The Philadelphia Story, Bringing Up Baby, North by Northwest, and To Catch a Thief. He was so perfect an image of the ideal man that even he was said to have marveled at it, once remarking that everyone wanted to be Cary Grant, and that even he wanted to be Cary Grant, aware that the effortless gentleman on the screen was a beautiful invention, built painstakingly by a lonely boy from Bristol. And unlike so many in this journey, Grant had the wisdom to walk away, retiring at the height of his elegance rather than lingering, choosing to spend his later decades as a devoted father and a happy man. In the autumn of 1986, while preparing to appear before an audience who adored him in Iowa, Cary Grant suffered a stroke and died that evening. He was 82 years old, beloved to the last. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered quietly, leaving behind no monument at all, only the films, only that flawless face and that easy laugh, preserved forever in flickering light. And now we come to the final stop on our long walk, and for it we travel far from Hollywood to the quiet green towns of New England, where our last beautiful man lived out his life and was laid to rest privately near the home he loved, so that there is no grand monument to visit, only a peaceful town and the memory of a truly extraordinary man. Paul Newman was born in Ohio in the winter of 1925, served in the Navy in the Pacific during the Second World War, and came to acting through the stage before Hollywood discovered what may have been the single most famous pair of blue eyes in the history of the movies, a startling, luminous blue that no camera could quite capture, and no audience could ever forget. But Newman was almost embarrassed by his own beauty, forever trying to prove he was more than a face, and prove it he did, across half a century of unforgettable performances, in Cool Hand Luke and The Hustler, and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and The Sting, a charismatic, effortlessly cool leading man who only deepened as an actor as the years went on, finally winning his Academy Award for The Color of Money. And yet the movies may not even be the most important thing Paul Newman did, for he became one of the great philanthropists of his age, founding a food company and giving away every single penny of its profits to charity, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years, and building camps for seriously ill children so that they could simply be kids for a while. He was also devoted, famously and rarely for Hollywood, to a single marriage, more than 50 years with the actress Joanne Woodward. In the autumn of 2008, after a long and remarkable life, Paul Newman died of cancer at his home in Connecticut. He was 83 years old. His burial was private, at the family's wish, with no public monument, and there is something exactly right about that, for a man who spent his whole life insisting that what mattered was not the beautiful face but the good you did with the time you were given. And so our long journey comes to its close. We began at the crypt of the very first great screen lover, and we have traveled the whole breadth of the country and out across the world and back, visiting 30 of the most beautiful men the movies ever made, silent princes and swashbucklers and kings, matinee idols who died dueling and rebels, frozen forever, young, epic heroes and secret agents, golden boys and kings of cool, some resting in marble and some in earth, many given to the open sea and the wild places of the world, a few in a hidden Brooklyn grave, a French monastery, a white tomb in Cairo, the hills of Scotland. 30 beautiful faces, 30 different endings, but every one of them proving the same quiet truth, that the flesh is only borrowed, that even the most dazzling beauty is loaned to us for just a little while, and that what truly outlasts it is the light on the screen and the tenderness in our remembering. These men made millions of strangers feel something, longing and wonder and delight, and long after their beautiful faces return to dust, that feeling remains, waiting in every old film, ready to bloom again the moment the lights go down. Thank you for walking with me today, and for keeping their memory, and for remembering that behind every gorgeous face on that silver screen was a real and mortal man who lived and loved and left us far too much beauty to ever truly lose. Rest well, every one of them. And rest well, friends, until we walk together again.